Hello and welcome to another edition of the Andrew Eborn Show, where I'm delighted that my very special guest is a fellow member of the Magic Circle, David Agrawal. How are you, David?
I'm very well. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, brilliant. And I say a member of the Magic Circle because we are a merry mixed bunch, aren't we? I mean, we have 1,500 members around the world, with everybody from Prince Charles to every walk of life, from taxi drivers to accountants to lawyers, and also brilliant techies in the TV world.
Well, rumour has it. I don't know who they are, Andrew, but yes.
So what I thought would be rather fun, actually, we'll do this in a couple of sections. I think it'd be rather fun just finding out a little bit about you and your background, and then tie some stuff into what we're particularly interested in as well, is what's going on in the world at the moment, where everybody's becoming a broadcaster.
Sure.
So you yourself, I mean, you studied engineering at Oxford.
Yes. Yeah, good research.
Now you see, no messing there. The joys of a little thing called Google. We'll do another episode of that another time. But you then went quite to a very famous production company with Graham Norton and Just So Production. Talk to me about that progression from Oxford to the world of TV.
Well, I went via the corporate route, actually. And I went into corporate production for a marketing consultancy. And then, just by pure chance, I ended up doing some editing for Fremantle, for X Factor. Purely because I bumped into somebody. It's one of these classic sort of nepotism stories, really, which I don't really think pans out anymore. But basically, it was somebody an old friend from university who needed somebody to cover for him with some editing. And then as luck would have it, he then moved to LA. And so his job became open. And so I ended up doing a lot of work for X Factor. And my claim to fame is that I did the video diaries for One Direction.
Oh, there's no messing there. You know, we love all of it. It's, and when you say you did the video diary editing, I mean, the amount of material they shoot is huge, isn't it? Talk to us about that process. It's like any of these sort of reality programs. It really is. It's documentary. It's not just about the talent, but it's all the story behind the talent. And hours upon hours upon hours of footage. And I know a few people in this sort of editing world, especially in reality programs. Talk to us about that process and how you decide what goes in, what goes out as you're going along.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting because I actually worked from the start with the digital team, and that's always been slightly different. So yes, the main show has you call it the shooting ratio, which is what you shoot to what you use. The main show has a crazy high shooting ratio. However, when you're working in more sort of mini features, or digital in those days was very much playing sort of second fiddle to the main production. It's got a much higher status now. So we would take what we could get time-wise. And so it was kind of the opposite of what you described, funnily enough. So we would have to come up with formats that we could shoot in 10 minutes that would give us a 5-minute show, 5-minute clip. And so it was really exciting times, actually, because we'd have so much freedom and we would come up with these formats. We'd have to shoot them really fast, turn them around really fast. And I guess it was that fast turnaround directing and production combined with my sort of engineering background that got me into fast turnaround production workflows and the whole sort of techie side of production.
Fantastic. So give an example of that then. So a lot of it would be scripted. I know different people work on different shows, like a lot of these reality shows where you sort of hope something might happen, but it's easy from a production point of view if you nudge, let me say, the cast in a particular direction, because then you can get the drips of gold dust that you want. In your instance, you're talking about more of a sort of scripted side where you've got 10 minutes, fantastic turnaround, to end up with 5 minutes of footage. Final footage is great. It's a great sort of production ratio.
It is. But it was unscripted. So I've always worked in unscripted. So that's all about the format. That's about coming up with something that you know is going to work. And so, for example, the One Direction video diaries were very much sort of, you'd get fan questions, and that was the backbone. But the trick there, which I think is why it worked so well, is letting the talent, in this case the guys, One Direction, come up with what they wanted to do. and just giving the talent the freedom to be themselves, and rather than going in and sort of prescribing exactly what you want them to say and do. I think if you give anyone enough sort of flexibility, you can get some gold.
Enough rope and they can hang themselves.
Yeah, that as well.
So we do that sort of thing, which is interesting. So what is, I mean, in terms of coming up with gold, so you've got the creative guys who are coming in on that sort of side. Who was the best at coming up with ideas?
In the One Direction days, it was very much, I mean, they're all great and they're all super creative.
Oh, wonderful. That's all good.
I know you're a big fan, Andrew. I mean, in those days, it was the sort of driving of the sort of formats was done by Louis. He was he was great to work with. They're all great to work with.
And what sort of, so when you sat down with him, you'd have I'm very interested in the process, because a lot of people watching this, you learn from the experts. It's all about that. You turn around and say, look, this has worked really well. This is the guy who worked with One Direction. Everybody go, fantastic. We love all that sort of stuff. What are the lessons to be learned? So you would have a creative meeting. They'd all come in with their ideas. Louis had a big pile of ideas. What were the sort of highlights that he would sort of come up? Give me a few examples.
It wasn't so much that we wouldn't really have a creative meeting. I'd go in with I knew what I'd want to achieve, and I'd have a structure around it. But then it's just, I mean, obviously they're very different people now. They've grown up. They're still great and a lot of fun. At the time, they just like to mess around. So I'd always construct I think the trick is to construct a format that allows the talent enough space to do what they're good at and to be themselves.
So if you were to give me a couple of examples of what happened, so
So one example, I was just thinking about it earlier actually, because we just moved house and we're putting up some.
I know you have. I was going to say it looks good. Your places, there are no boxes everywhere. I'm so impressed.
Well, Andrew, if I turn the camera by like 10 degrees, it's a different world.
That's the reality, isn't it? We should have multi-facing cameras. And firstly, nobody wears anything below this.
Exactly. I've got my torn jeans on.
You got your torn jeans.
I've been building my furniture.
Oh, that's...
But it made me think. Think of a thing we did with them for. They won an award. It's called the Teen Choice Award, and they send out a surfboard, and the surfboard, funnily enough, came all chopped into pieces because they can't ship a whole surfboard. And I had to record an acceptance speech for them. And so I thought, okay, well, why don't they, I'll say me, I had a little team. And so we had a little brainstorm between us. And I think it was my colleague Voss who came up with it. But we thought we'd get them to assemble the surfboard. And so we did these fake IKEA instructions, which is why I was just thinking about it, and sort of a spoof of IKEA. And we just filmed. We let them loose with various tools and staple guns and tape and string in one of the offices at Sony. We let them loose for 15 minutes, just filmed what happened. And of course, it's chaos. You give those guys, and they're really up for it. You give them all this stuff, and it was just carnage. Just everyone getting wrapped in tape. Harry Styles getting sealed in the box, which. It worked really well, but it's you kind of with those guys that if you give them that situation, it's going to work well. So I think that's my
premise. First of all, you get your characters. And do you brief them?
You have to know the talent. That's important.
Yeah. So you let them shine. Absolutely. Do you brief them beforehand? You give them particular instructions. Say, look, this really works. If you have a look, here's a tape. Make sure you get wound up in it. But do you give them any particular instructions?
Yeah, generally during it. I mean, you've got to steer it. You've got to give them ideas and prompt them, but you want to see where it goes, and then sort of steer it from there. I think if you give people too much to think about, then you lose that freshness and that.
A little bit of spontaneity, instructions as you're going along, which sounds good. What was the worst idea they came up with?
Oh, I can't blame them for any of the ideas, to be honest. Oh, that's a good question. Now you're asking. I mean, it sounds like a cop-out, because I can't think of any, but I'm sure there were.
It is a cop-out. But one of them. Give us one which didn't quite make it to screen.
The reason I can't think of any is because I'd have just edited it out and never thought about it again.
And I guess that's the secret, isn't it? Because if you're editing on the fly, you're not wasting time. You've got the pressure of saying, okay, I've got 10 minutes to film a 5-minute section, which will then get, it's mainly on social media, was it? Or it was used in the program as well?
That was actually used in the Teen Choice Awards. But yeah, most of the stuff that even today, most of the stuff I film is for social.
And that is getting zillions of views around the world.
Yes.
So you fell into it by accident. Then your friend was away. Thank goodness for that.
I know.
Forget nepotism. It'd be great if your father or mother or whatever was there, but you didn't need it. Friends are also good because that's a good introduction. Yeah. You then went from doing that sort of exciting stuff to Just So Production. How did that come about?
So, well, there was a stage in between that where I ran my own production company for many years, and then just so it's actually not Graham Norton's company. It's a different company that does premium branded content. And
that's Just So as opposed to So, which is just
exactly.
So without the just is okay. I get it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So it's mainly sort of premium corporate content, but for sort of very high end brands. And they do beautiful stuff for, they do stuff for Red Bull. At the time, I did a lot of stuff for Skype and Microsoft. And my job was to start the technology team there. So to move us into sort of, because they've got amazing award-winning sort of creativity in conventional films. And my job was to bring them into interactive films and sort of production workflows. And to explore that area.
And how did that change? I mean, people talk about production workflows. Give us again that sort of example. This was something that the company was already set up, and you were then brought in to basically say, look, you need to work out from a technology point of view, bring in the right sort of skill set, and help us manage this whole thing. How do you start such a job?
It was very much a sort of little startup within the company, and it's still to this day it's the best company I've ever worked with. I mean, it's an incredible company. Just
what made it so good? I mean, people talk about the best company I've ever worked with. Well, yeah. Why was it so good?
It's just they were led by just two brilliant directors who they were just really smart. Everyone that worked there was creative and smart. And they also very cleverly had gone after a sort of high-end client base. And so we had the budgets to work with, we could do really cool stuff. Yeah, I loved it.
And it is one of the things we've been looking at about what makes a great leader, because you can have people who are incredibly smart, but actually not necessarily the best company you can work for, because life can be quite miserable when you have wonderful creative forces, and it's all publicly documented about those massive, the global gorillas, where you have a brilliant person at the head, but life there can be quite tough. It's quite rare to get both a wonderful talent and also that sort of all-encompassing feel-good factor, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is really rare. I think it is, and that's why, it's a pretty special.
So why did you leave?
Why did I leave? That's a really good question. I'd always been freelance until I worked for them, and I'd run my own production company. And
Percept Productions.
Percept, exactly, like Perceptive, but without the.
No.
And I think I'm just wired to work for myself. So yeah, if I was going to work for someone, I wouldn't want to work.
Sure, I mean, it's an industry which is dictated by people effectively setting up their own company. So it's your service company, effectively.
Yes, but it's also a production company. So we used to have an office and employees, and at the moment it's just me. But yeah,
that's okay. Most things in production, it's like a concertina, isn't it? You bring them in whenever you have a production. So you decided it's the freelance world, which is a lot of people encouraging people to do that anyway. And the sort of clients and the sort of work that you're doing, because you've worked with Thames, you've worked with, as you say, you worked with X Factor beforehand. You've worked with all the good, the great, and the unwashed in TV. What would be an ideal gig for you?
An ideal gig. I mean, I'm lucky enough. I do get to do some ideal gigs. So the other week we did something with Fatboy Slim, which is a live stream from his.
He was down in Brighton, wasn't he? And I saw that. Were you involved with that side?
Yes, yeah. I was looking after the audience, the live audience part of that.
So when you say you're looking after the live audience, and we'll come on to this in the next program, but when you say you're looking after the audience, what does that mean?
Well, not literally looking after the individual audience members, but that's
more than yes.
For the merging of the real-time live audience with the live stream,
right?
Which isn't complicated, but it's not necessarily obvious how to do it because you've got latency issues, which I'm sure you know about.
And so, how do you deal with that in practical terms?
Do you mean? Do you want the geeky detail, Andrew?
Well, yeah, absolutely. No, go for it. So people, if you're looking for tips, I mean, you're the guy to come to. This is great, but if you're looking at that, so it is latency is a big issue. Wait, that sort of stuff. How do you deal with it?
So, for the trick of a high quality live stream is to allow plenty of time to encode it. So typically, if you're watching a good quality live stream, it's maybe 30 seconds delayed, but part of that is because you want the encoders to have time to do the maths that are required to compress what would be a huge video file into something that's small enough to stream over the internet. And that maths takes computing power, and that takes time. And the longer you're prepared to wait, i.e. the longer you're prepared to delay compared to real time, the more maths you can apply to that video stream, and the more efficient you can compress it. Which means for a given file size, i.e. for a given sort of bandwidth that someone's got at home, if you delay it for longer, you can deliver them a better quality because you've got more time to do the maths to squeeze that quality into the size. The other good thing about the delay is that you can fill what's called a buffer, which means that if somebody's internet speed drops temporarily, it doesn't matter because you've got that buffer of time. Now, something like we're doing now via Zoom in real time, you can't do any of that. And what Zoom has nailed and why it's become so huge is partly its ease of use, but also it copes incredibly well and kind of invisibly with all these problems. So Zoom actually downgrades the quality quite a lot, but it does it in a way that you don't notice, and it copes with speed dropouts in a very clever way. It will speed up your audio. It will it'll bring you back to real time quite smoothly. So it's a trade-off between those things. If you want the high quality, you have to have the delay. But if you need the immediate reaction, then you have to use sort of Zoom style techniques. And so bringing in a live audience brings both those worlds together. And so it's sort of a particular production challenge because you can't have the live audience watching the actual broadcast because then they're reacting 30 seconds too late. So you have to do a second broadcast in real time, accepting it's going to be slightly lower quality to the live audience.
And that was sort of makes sense. I mean, we've done a similar sort of thing where we're doing lots of these online concerts. As you know, we put on lots of major artists. Getting one of the great things when good old Lady Gaga was raising money or raising love, I think it was. There was no money involved other than it was brought to you by a corporation. And I love seeing the different pop stars and their wonderful bookshops behind them. And they look like bookshops because most of the books had never been touched. But one of my favourite was the Rolling Stones. And you had the four of them in the thing there. And you had good old Charlie Watts. I think he was playing saucepans or something. But each of those, from a technical point of view, they're all shot separately. Obviously, you can't do them in real time because of that delay and so on and so forth. So from a production point of view, that's exactly what you're doing, obviously, with the audience side. Then you're getting the reaction, but you're playing the stuff back to them because otherwise there would be that delay and they're laughing in the wrong places. Is that it in a nutshell?
Yes, exactly. So in that case, it is live. It's genuinely live. But yeah, they're watching the broadcast in real time. So that
Yeah, so it's not the concert and recording at the same sort of time, because obviously there's that delay between them, which will make sense. Now, you with your independent hat on, I mean, you've worked with some of the great brands in television. I mean, you were working on The Apprentice as well. Similar sort of thing. Talk me about that experience.
That was with my director hat on, really, rather than my technology hat. So I guess I've had a slightly unique career in that I've worked on the creative side and the tech side, which that's how I try and sort of pitch myself as a bit different in the industry. So I was creating additional content, like I did for a lot of shows, additional content for the BBC website.
And in terms of that, then, is that because nowadays in television, people do all, as you say, you wear many hats. So you're coming up with the creative ideas as well as directing and so on and so forth. Are you taking what we now call the One Direction approach? Are you going to the reality stars and saying, because that's what they are, it's a reality show in addition to being a business show. Are you going to them and say, look, here, do you have ideas, or do you go to them and you feed ideas and develop that? Are you working on the same sort of principle as you did with One Direction?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly same principle. But it's not going to them and saying, do you have ideas? It's understanding who they are and trying to get a feel for what would make them tick, and then constructing a premise or a format that they would thrive in.
So a lot of what you're doing, I mean, as you say, traditional television years ago, people would wear as a particular hat, and that was the director, and that was the format person, that was the script person, this is the runner, this is the, as you say, the techie person. You have to now be all of those. Is that the secret to your success?
Yeah. Well, I think that's, a lot of people are doing that now. If you just look at the YouTubers who are just doing everything. And I think that was born out of, I was probably one of the first generation to be doing that, only because I was working in digital from before YouTube existed. And I think it's digital that has spawned that new way of making TV where everyone has to do everything. And there's pros and cons of that. I mean, you don't get Netflix production values by one person doing everything. So I think there's still a place for specialists.
Fantastic. Well, in the next episode, this thrilling, and it's been more longer than 10 minutes, so we're going to have to edit it down to that sort of a Liam type idea, direction. But I want a bit of background, because it does help put things into perspective, because the people that we're talking to as well are lots of the people that you work with generally. So we talked about Fremantle, we talked about Thames, we talked about One Direction. All of those have been on the show, and we'll be coming back. It'll be like the old Cilla Black, surprise, surprise. We can reunite you, which would be good. But in the next episode, what we'll do, we'll have a look specifically at some of the live streaming and remote production, and also give some people some practical tips as to how to do that. But in the meantime, David, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.